tell me when just to vibe going on. You just gonna set it up. I was just waiting for those horns. Should be coming soon, right? What you feeling down for? No, I like that. I like that. Just vibing right now. Don't be sad. Open your eyes. The sun is shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Good afternoon, family. This is another Sunday. This is another Afrocentricity Bookman show. This is Brother Jegna with you here again. And hope you had a great week so far. I hope you're having a good Sunday also. I must remind you that Afrocentricity Bookman show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. You can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. That is 0208 800 6663. So please go to Glass Are Us for all your glass and glazing repairs, double glazing, shelving, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, balcony balustrades. Please go to Glass Us. If you mention this show, you'll get a 10% discount. So 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15. You can get them on 0208 800 6663. Glass Are Us. So, where are we? We are continuing to read the great book, the classic book by Dr. Naim Akbar. The book is called Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. So, and this book is not, I think I mentioned before, just really for people who were formerly enslaved, and our ancestors came out of that. Even the people who were colonized have really went for the same thing, because their behavior was manipulated. They had to adapt their behavior to live in the conditions which so they could survive. And sadly, because we wasn't counseled, we weren't spoken to after we came out of colonization or enslavement, we didn't have a counseling. Some of the behaviors that we find that we have were behaviors carried on from our time of domination. So this book really opens our eyes so we can see what behaviors we may carry even today, which is negative to our future and our present. So, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Naim Akbar. We are on page 32, so I'm going to continue now. So the subtitle here is Strategies to Break the Chains of Slavery. It is important to understand as a primary rule that the restoration of African consciousness is a process that must be accomplished primarily by African people. It is unrealistic to expect the descendants of the slave masters will initiate and play a major role in the elimination of the mental shackles that were placed on their ancestors, that were put in place by their ancestors. This is not a condemnation of European American or Europeans generally, people. As was the case with the abolition of physical slavery, many white people played critical roles which facilitated the alleviation of the philosophical contradictions of legalized slavery in a free country. That's free in question in their speech marks. However, it was the impetus and the persistence of the former slaves themselves who took the radical posture to demand uncompromised elimination of the system of slavery. We are again reminded of the tension experienced between Frederick Douglass, who was an escaped slave, and his liberal white abolitionist friends who viewed many of his positions as being too extreme. Certainly, Nat Turner, as the great Nat Turner, had no white allies in his forceful removal of the captor's boot from his neck. So much of the European conscientiousness is based on its affirmation of greatness and superiority, in contrast to the inferiority of the wretchedness of the Africans. This false security built into white supremacist culture clearly limits the role that Europeans are capable of understanding or playing in the restoration of African consciousness. Whether whites play a role or not, it is not nearly as important as it is for the black people to understand that our ultimate mental liberation must be guided by our independent action and activity. We cannot operate with the expectation that our true liberation can only come when European people change their mentality. The elimination of white racism is not a necessary prerequisite for the liberation of the African mind. Black people cannot commit excessive energy to the effort to alter the attitudes and consciousness of white people, with the assumption that this is the path to freedom. We cannot appeal to somebody's moral consciousness, particularly if these peoples do not have any morals and do not have any consciousness. Certainly, the obstacles created by white supremacist institutions and attitudes cause great difficulties in the march to black mental liberation. There is no doubt that if those obstacles were removed, progress would be much easier. It is evident, after all, that these centuries, that it is unrealistic to expect Europeans' white supremacist mentality is going to disappear anytime soon. White racism is a fact of life, and we must strategize solutions which are independent of its initial elimination. So I do agree with that 100%, yeah? We must develop our own strategies to overcome these things, okay? This is the only way. We can only do ourselves. We cannot rely on anybody. So when people come to you and say, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, just tell them people to stop that conversation or move from next to you. We must be a solution-based people. All people in the world have problems. There's nobody doesn't have any problems. But what is about really is problem solving. What can we do? What are the solutions where we are? Okay? We can't have a moany, whiny conversation, dialogue. It's no good. Let's come on conversations, telling people to go away from you. Okay? However, if anybody's interested in speaking about solutions, actions, behaviors, which will free us, that is what we must focus on. As we have discussed above, the primary objective to freeing the black mind is to change the consciousness of black people. This is not a simple or brief process. We must understand that the current consciousness of black people is the consequence of over 4 centuries of direct intervention and even longer efforts to destroy the indigenous institutions of African people, which developed and sustained the independent human consciousness. We cannot expect that this process will be reversed at the end of the year or by reading a book. Once we embark upon the journey, change has already begun and will continue as long as the direction is maintained. We dare not surrender and declare defeat if we don't immediately see the massive results that we would wish. We must understand that generations of unborn African people will be the true beneficiaries of this process. Knowledge of self. In order to change the African consciousness, we must change the information that is in the African mind. We cannot equate awareness with information, though information is the roadmap to awareness, and it is a critical part of the process. The knowledge of self, which was the foundation of the highly successful Black Reform Program of the Honourable Elijah Muhammad in 1965, and the premise of ancient African teachers in the Nile Valley over 4,000, probably more to say over 6,000 years ago, still remains an essential ingredient in this process of mental liberation. A fundamental component of the chains that continue to handicap black minds is the excessive and distorted information about white people and the absence of information about ourselves. And I think this is critical to it, people, yeah? Because we grow up within this kind of Eurocentric world, the information our minds get bombarded with are all about whiteness. And we get so little about blackness. However, when we do get information about blackness, for the most part, it's all negative. And this is what we have to fight. This is what we have to understand and move away from this. Consistent with the argument we have already made in this discussion, European people have done an admirable job in ensuring that the content of their consciousness was well informed about their greatness. The great stories of Louis XIV, Columbus, Napoleon, Queen Victoria, Copernicus, Galileo, and the Greeks, and the Romans are fundamental elements of the information system that we are given about European people. This barrage of information about Europeans and their greatness is systematically given to themselves to ensure that they maintain their consciousness of who they are. So when we live, let me say, I'm interjecting here, when we live within this system, they are given these things constantly to pump themselves up, to give them a good, strong self-esteem, to ensure that they think that they are great people. But we just happen to live here within the same system, and we get these same definitions put into our minds. And then, because they're constant, we begin to accept these definitions of their superiority, and on the other side of the coin, our inferiority, and we don't even realise this is happening. So when you have a conversation with people, you hear how they speak, you can see how they feel lowly. These are black people, how lowly themselves. And when you speak with Europeans, you can see how they actually believe they are superior, which is a joke. Yeah. One thing what has happened is that, I think I mentioned before, is that enslavement was a two-way street. On one level, it's turned white people insane. They carry around a level of insanity. What do I mean by that? There's certain aspects that enslavement and colonization has done to the white mind or the European mind. Things like delusions of grandeur. They actually believe that they are the best people on the planet, even though these people were in caves when we was creating civilization. Perceptual distortion. When they see things, they cannot see clearly. They say, I can't see that. No, I don't understand that. Yeah. Also, denial of reality. They deny things, African people, for example, were the first people of the planet. But they, even with evidence there, I don't believe that. They deny reality. Europeans were educated by Africans. I can't believe that. So they deny reality as well. And also, they apportion blame to other people. They could chop you down in the street, but they'll blame you for being chopped down by them when you're innocent. For example, in the USA, for example, policemen who shoot an unarmed African, male or female, doesn't matter. But what they'll do, they'll say that even though the person was unarmed, they'll say that the person who caused it is the unarmed person, who now may be dead. So they apportion blame to what they do. So these are signs of madness, by the way. And you speak to any psychologist, they'll tell you this. Yeah. But on the other side, what we're really going to focus on now is ourselves. What has been put into us over these years of colonization and enslavement, and unfortunately it's been passed down through the generations, is that we think in terms of we must go to other people to ask them what to do. How can I do this? How can I do that? Can I be allowed to do this? This is not what free people do. We must have self-determination. We must do what we need to do. So we need to understand who we are and become the great people that we are. We are top shelf. We need to go back top shelf, but it's going to take time because 500 years of domination is not, as you just said a little while ago, it's not going to be solved overnight. But we need to keep on moving in the right direction. This is what the whole concept of Afrocentricity is about. We need to see ourselves as players in civilization, in history, in the present world. We must be agents of our own independence and self-determination and freedom. I continue. Consistent with the argument that we have already made, my apologies, this barrage of information about European greatness is systematically given to themselves to ensure that they maintain their consciousness of who they are. Quite accurately, they realize that unless their children are given information about themselves, they will never develop the consciousness that will permit them to maintain their control and influence over the world's major resources and their actions of self-determination and survival within the human family. So the story about European accomplishments and the descriptions of European culture and structuring the world's reality around European experiences are essential parts of building the European consciousness to ensure its survival and maintain the freedoms of European people. So that's a very important thing there, yeah? They said that their children must be constantly given information about them so they continue to be who they are. And they believe they are the rulers of the world. And effectively, they're about 10%. The Europeans are about 10% of the world. How can 10% of the world rule 90% people? How can 10% of the world rule 90% of the world? Because they've put systems in place and they work together with these systems. Without these systems in place, but part of some of the systems in place is our education, or put another way, our miseducation. So we help, we assist in their domination. I continue. We do not wish to argue in this discussion that European people are not in their rights to offer such information to their expansion and maintenance of their human consciousness in order to ensure their self-interest. We do agree, however, that if this is the only information that African people receive, then they develop an inordinate regard for the self-interest of Europeans and inadequate or no regard for themselves or their own self-interest. I hope you understand that. On the one hand, we are getting all this information that we act in the self-interest of Europeans, but because inadequate or lacking of information about self, we forget about our own self-interest. Therefore, black children need to know about black accomplishments throughout history and throughout the world. They need to know about our heroes and sheroes, our discoverers, scientists, teachers, artists, inventors, as much about the greatness of African accomplishments as Europeans are taught about the greatness of European accomplishments. So, Sheikh Anta Diop, our great scholar who passed away a few years ago, Sheikh Anta Diop says that the Nile Valley, that's like Kush and Kemet, Nubia and Egypt today, called, but we're talking about the ancient world, Africans were there, is the same to African people like Greece and Rome are to Europeans. Because you must look back to your classical civilization. And our classical civilization, educated theirs, by the way. This is when you understand this, you understand who we are. We do not really fully understand who we are yet. And it's deliberate, because as you see, because if we understand who we are, then we will not go and ask anybody for our freedom. We'll just take it with both hands. So we are kept in a system of, or a state of slumber at the moment because of this. These things are deliberate. Remember, these people spend millions and millions a year, millions and millions per year on mind control techniques. Do you think when they show commercials on the TV, they haven't worked out how they can get people to manipulate people's minds to go to the supermarkets the next day and buy goods? It's the same thing. They know how to manipulate people's ideas, or put another way, they use ideas and images to manipulate people's minds. And this is what's been done to us. So we feel inferior. We feel that we cannot rise. Yeah, we feel not so good about how we look. I continue. They need to know about our heroes and heroines are discoverers, scientists, teachers, artists, inventors, and as much as about the greatness of African accomplishments as Europeans are taught about the greatness of European accomplishments. Since our objective is not the captivity of Europeans, nor the guiltless domination of them, this information about the African accomplishments should not exclude the information about them, the Europeans, and their accomplishments. We need to know about our great ideas, our great victories. But we need to also know about our great defeats and how these defeats were transitory and did not deter the forward progress of African people as a whole. So it's a very good point there. We should not say, well, you're great people, we did this, we did that. We need to know what went wrong. We want to know when we was defeated. We need to analyze it to see why we are defeated. So when we move forward into the future, we know when we come up to certain situations again, we know how to deal with it. So we must learn every part of what we did great, what we did the best, how we improve things, but we must always look on what we did wrong and analyze it all so we can move forward. So it's really, I think I said, many of you are familiar with Sankofa, the idea that sometimes if you come up to a problem, you must go back into the past to seek answers so you can move forward again, strongly into the future. The Great Restoration Project of especially the last 20 years has expanded and intensified the significant work that was begun by W.E.B. Du Bois, J.A. Rogers, Carter G. Woodson, Martin Delaney, George G.M. James, and hundreds of others who realized the significance of reviving the history and telling the story of African accomplishments as a significant part of the black liberation process. The continued work of the great scholars of the late half of the 20th century, such as Chancellor Williams, who wrote Destruction of Black Civilization, John G. Jackson, John Hendrik Clark, Joseph Ben Yochanan, Sheikh Anta Diop, Ivan van Sertima, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Malana Karenga, Wayne Nobles, Francis Cress Weldon, Malefi Asante, who is the creator of the Afrocentricity concept, philosophy we've got today, and many, many others who will be remembered for generations to come as significant contributors to the rebuilding of the information about African and African American reality that was erased by the distortions of slavery and the slave makers. Though there has been a considerable controversy about the work of these scholars because they have dared to reveal what had been systematically concealed, they have made an invaluable contribution to breaking the chains whose strength had been fortified by the ignorance about our history and ourselves. So that line there, scholars because they dare to reveal what had been systematically concealed. You must understand that European historiography, i.e. the writing of history, they use this to dominate our minds. It's been rewritten deliberately to obscure the truth and to reify, to valorize European people above everybody else. And when we read it, we become infected, unfortunately, with this virus of inferiority and white supremacy. So we must make a necessary start to restoring our consciousness of black people about themselves. It is not just a story of history, but a story of science, that every people have contributed to the progress of science, and no one people has a monopoly on the accomplishments of science and technology. It is important that all people understand that the resources of the world are available to all of its inhabitants, and the claims of a superior knowledge, technology, and circumstance is an accident of information and consciousness, and not a divine right given to some people and systemically kept away from others. The information about how black people came to be in the state we find ourselves in is an important story to be told, so that future generations will understand that it was not a genetic deficiency or a divine decree which created our circumstances, but the advantage of human oppression that created the privilege of a few and the poverty of the many. So again, he makes some very, very good points there. So this is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. This is Brother Jegna. Don't forget, Bless Radio. People, every Sunday between 4 and 6. Please tune in, yeah? We are reading Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Naeem Akbar. This information begins to free our minds, to let us know that there are no limits to our potential. When young black boys learn that there are no limits to our possibilities on the basketball courts, or football courts, for football pitches as well, we create the athletic genius of Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, or Pele, or Johnny Barnes. And in their genius, they recreate the games of basketball and football. But when our young people know that there are no limits to their potential in the world of manufacturing, communication, physics, chemistry, or the science of the human mind, then those same young black minds who create dances on the dance floor or compose music on their bodies with their hand jive will create these fields of human endeavor with the same incomparability. Information about the black reality and experience must be transmitted as broadly and intensely as possible. Black singers must sing about it. Black researchers must identify it. Black actors must act, and black preachers must preach it. From the cradle to the grave, we must submerge ourselves in information about ourselves from books, pictures, and whatever source that will bring the messages to our minds. Each bit of information helps to mold the keys, which will open the chains that remain in our minds. So let me repeat that again. Information about the black reality and experience must be transmitted as broadly and intensely as possible. Black singers must sing about it. Black researchers must identify it. Black actors must act it. Black scholars must conceptualize it. Black teachers must teach it. And the black preachers must preach it. From the cradle to the grave, we must submerge ourselves in information about ourselves from books, pictures, and whatever source that will bring the messages to our minds. Each bit of the information helps to mold the keys that will open the chains that remain in our minds. So, very profound there. I hope you all listen to that, yeah? So, for example, what we must do is Africanize our houses. We must have images, pictures, books, music, fabrics, you name it, yeah? We must have a picture of the most blackest, most magnificent image we could have in the house. So every time you walk through your house, you walk past this. We must conceptualize greatness in ourselves. We have to do this. I've been to some of my family's people's houses, for example, in Jamaica, and obviously they've got their family pictures up there, but they still have a lot of these European images all over the place, images of the divine. So why are they there? What do they do to the minds of the people? So we need to do the opposite to ourselves. We need to have these images of greatness, books about our greatness, everywhere. I continue. Celebration time. Come on. The popular music group Kool and the Gang popularized this song in the early 1980s. So I'm sure you all know celebration time. Come on. So even though they were singing about a rather transitory party experience, the lyric captures the imperative of a more generic process that is necessary to remove the chains of mental slavery. We must learn to comfortably celebrate ourselves. Self-celebration, and we must again emphasize, does not necessarily mean a degradation of others. It does not unapologetically sing the greatness of our accomplishments and special blessings to the world. It tells each new generation something about the value of the fabric from which they are made. Cultures and institutions put considerable resources into creating images and opportunities to sing the praises of their accomplishments. This process is an essential part of the maintaining a free mind, but it becomes even more fundamental in freeing a captive mind. Certainly one of the major strategies for enslaving the mind was a degradation of the black self-image, or the black African self. The story of natural black inferiority and ugliness were constant stories told to destroy the worth of the black mind. And I think we can all agree that this is still with us today. The fantasies of African backwardness is incapable of technological development and characterized by superstitious, humanly regressive acts of cannibalism and savagery were all constructed in Tarzan stories. Little black Sambo images and thousands of other derogatory ideas and illustrations to destroy the black person's self-image and to further the idea of black incompetence and deficiency. So I hope you all listen there. So the movies, Hollywood, even today, Hollywood, books in the schools, what our children go through every day, unfortunately, to be miseducated, are all there to destroy the self-image of African. Many of us walk around with a negative self-image. I mean, you could argue, obviously, that some of our children are the most confident people you ever see. But as a group's image, a group self-image, they think lowly, because they think themselves, well, at school, we've been to school, and we didn't really learn anything really that black people did outstanding. We know they're good sportsmen, and we know that Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, but I don't really know. But we'll speak about, the scientists and who don't look like them, and we'll speak about the musicians who don't look like them. So this negative self-image has been implanted in us, and it's topped up every single day of the week. This is what we have to overcome. We need to understand this, and we need to tell our children that greatness is expected of them because they come from a great people. In fact, they come from the greatest people. Why? Because they are African people. So we have to think about the greatness of our people. Our accomplishments. Do you know that? You know the pyramids, okay? The pyramids. There's hundreds of pyramids in Egypt and Nubia, in Kush. And there's more in Kush, by the way, than as in Egypt. And the 3 great pyramids on the Giza plateau are the great wonders of the world. And the Japanese, I think this is in the 1980s, they said, okay, we're going to go to Egypt. We're going to build some pyramids. The Japanese are supposed to be the most highest technological people there are. So I think the Nippon company went to Africa, went to Egypt. We're going to build a pyramid. Only a little bit itty bitty one. So they said, we're going to use the techniques that these ancient Egyptians used. So they tried all these techniques, and they ground the stone to scars on it and scratches and broken up edges, and it was terrible. They couldn't do it. So they said, okay, what we're going to use now, we're going to use the most technological equipment. So they used all these jackhammers and these saws and technical stuff, and they could still not breathe. They used helicopters to move it there, and then when they tried to build a pyramid, it's all out of shape, all smashed up edges. It looked terrible. And the Egyptian government made them tear it down because it was just an eyesore. So you can see these people with the most highly technical equipment and stuff today could not even build a tiny little itty bitty little pyramid. Our ancestors built these pyramids, massive pyramids. They still don't know how they're built today. So the greatness of African people, as you know, I'll say to you, knowledge has been lost. The knowledge what the ancient had, which our ancestors had, what they created, has been lost. It's been such a loss of knowledge, it's incredible. Because some of the carvings of the hardest, toughest stones, they said today we can only do it with our most technical diamond-tipped drills and the most powerful jackhammers to cut these equipment up. Said, but how can these people have done it in the ancient world when we believe they only had like copper tools or bronze tools and things like that? So they still don't know how many of the stuff what they did. They still don't know how they did it. When I was in Egypt, I've been in Egypt a couple of times. I was in Egypt, and if you see the wall that they've plastered, the wall is perfect. And what the guide was saying, he says that scientists have come there and have taken little pieces of the wall to send away to test to see how did they do this. Because they can't understand how this wall, which has maybe been there some 5,000 to 6,000 years, hasn't one crack in it. And as you know, when you get plaster on your house, after a few years you have to replaster it because it's cracked again. And they still cannot work out how they did it. Even though they've done tests, they don't know how they did it. So the knowledge what our ancestors had has been lost. It's been greatly lost. So we think that these people today, we look at these people, oh wow, look what they can do. But they're not even half as good as what was past. But now, technology moves very quickly because of computers. Because computers have made people learn much quicker than we did previously. But I continue. Celebration then becomes a healing. If Europeans could comfortably identify themselves with every image of Santa Claus to the Son of God in order to celebrate who they are, why shouldn't we find images both real and imagined, to communicate to black African people something about our potential greatness. Perhaps Kwanzaa is not an actual African holiday, but why shouldn't we have a week-long celebration that brings pride and dignity to our culture? Why shouldn't the celebration that brings pride and dignity to the entire nation and stop on the second Monday of January to celebrate the battle for human dignity of Martin Luther King? If black people decide to call an assembly of 1 million black men to Washington, D.C. on a Monday in October 1995, then why question the celebration, since the very structure of the city of D.C. so emphatically celebrates the greatness of European American accomplishments? The hundreds of statues and museums and galleries and libraries and plaques and monuments which blanket the city consistently celebrate the greatness of European Americans. But when you know about the Washington city, you can see Africanness all over it, the way it was built, the statues there, many things are kind of hidden in plain view. There is a book by Tony Browder called Egypt on the Potomac, and he explains all the African symbolism which you'll find right through Washington. It's quite amazing when you understand all this stuff. The hundreds of statues, museums, galleries, libraries, plaques and monuments obviously are there for Europeans to celebrate themselves. One could easily walk through DC for an entire day and conclude that only European Americans, males, built the country. It is not accidental that African American males continue to run the country, in that the celebration and information they receive continually reinforces their greatness. So I think what it's saying there is that you don't really see the women there. It's just European men is everywhere. The Greeks, let me say this, the Greeks had a particular love of men by men. When you see a lot of statues, all about these men, many of them nude, of course. And so there is a kind of a deification of white men by white men. And you just look through the history, the way they're talking that, how you see women only got there in Parliament. Many of the people really spoke about their wives or their children. Columbus, for example, he read great dictionaries, but he didn't even mention his mother once. When he got to the Nile Valley, the pharaohs always spoke about their mothers and their sisters. They built tombs and temples and pyramids to their wives and their mothers and things like this. So you can see the difference between European culture and African culture. African culture, the woman is the centre of our family. We are matriarchal. But Europeans call it a patriarchal society. It's a glorification of white men. When we glorify the whole family, the men, the women and the children. Very important to understand that we come from the southern cradle. We're not built from the northern cradle. We wasn't created in the ice. We was created in the southern cradle in the sun. And this is why our cultures are opposing sometimes, but they are different. It is not to say one is greater than the other, but ours is ours. So we need to just adopt our one. We must unashamedly display our images and great ancestral figures throughout their environments, from the pictures on the walls to the statues in the park and the street names. We should celebrate our heritage and those people who have distinguished themselves as African people of greatness. We should have more than one street named for African American persons, particularly in communities where we live. We should immortalize our great builders, thinkers, and warriors by constructing their images and placing their pictures systematically throughout their communities. So let me just talk about that for a second, because I know very recently in New York, they put up a street name for Dr. Ben Yochanan, which is a great ceremonials there. You can go on YouTube as well, put in Dr. Ben street name. It's a brilliant celebration there, because where we live, we must, as I said earlier, must Africanize it. But in Nigeria, for example, they're putting up these big statues of this big white Jesus person. How can countries which are 99%, 95% African, black, be putting up these big images to white gods? It just shows you the damage that's been done by colonization and enslavement. We think, even if you just know a little bit about science, just put it this way, let's think about science for a moment. The first people to work on the planet, the first Homo sapiens sapiens, are African people, black people. Gloger's law, these are scientific laws, these by Europeans, says that people who evolved in the tropics must have had melanin to survive, black skin to survive, because we would have died. Skin cancer, you know what happens to your people who don't have the melanin, going to the sun. So the original people are black people. Good. So when you think about the original people, black people, then how could our God be white. I hope you're thinking about this. How come the original people of the planet be black people? Clearly, the creator then must have been black, if you think along that lines. But Africans don't have a concept or maybe chronology, some Africans of course, so they're building these massive statues to whiteness. Why would you do that in Africa itself? Well, a simple knowledge of science will make you understand that our gods have to be. I think they would say we made God in our image. So just think about that for a while. And also when you think about it, for 70,000 years, there's only black people on the planet. There's no Europeans yet. Why? Because we hadn't left the African continent yet. So how can our God be white? The creator of everything, be white. It's not really hard to, yeah? And when you read the Bible as well, also, the Bible says that he had hair like brass burnt in the oven and hair like lamb's wool. So it's not really hard to work out who this person or who the creator was or who created the image of the creator. We should have more than one street named after African people, particularly in communities where we live. We should immortalize our great builders, thinkers and warriors by constructing their images and placing their pictures systematically throughout our communities. Our churches should show pictures of great women and men of faith who endured to make a way for young black people who had not been born. Although biblical and Quranic heroes tell a distant story of the power of faith, a greater story is told by our immediate ancestors who took the faith and changed not only the ancient world, but our contemporary world as well. Excuse me 1 minute, I was going to have a drink. Excuse me, dry throat. Right, so I think that every Baptist church at least and every black religious gathering place should have pictures of Cynthia Wesley, Eddie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson. These 4 black girls who were killed when terrorists threw a bomb through the window of a 16th century Baptist church in Birmingham, Alabama, in September the 15th, 1963. So I remember Malcolm X talking about this. The Ku Klux Klan blow up churches. And as you may know, they still burn down churches today. Very recently, I think it was last year, a black church was burnt down. And who are they charged for it? The son of one of the sheriff of the town. The son of the police. Burnt down the church. Ku Klux Klan. How can a Christian country burn churches, blow up churches? Doesn't seem quite right. Why would a Christian burn a Christian church? I think you know the answer. I'm moving on. They should be the angelic cherubims who we think of since their lives were lost in an innocent worship in a church that stood for the dignity of their people. As we discuss in greater detail in the next chapter of this volume, if we must have images of religious characters, let them look like us. What did he say? If we must have images of religious characters, let them look like us. If we must have Santa Claus entering our houses on Christmas Eve and occupying our malls from early November into December the 24th, then make sure that your black child has a fantasy of a black Santa Claus. My own view is to get rid of it. Who comes with goodies and good cheer from black hands and hearts. The mythology of the culture must celebrate ourselves, as do the facts of culture. The persuasion for this argument is demonstrated by looking around the world in any culture where people's minds are free and they engage in self-determined action. You will find that they comfortably celebrate themselves in hundreds of ways, and this cannot be denied. If you go to China, you don't see Europeans there in their images of their mythology. If you go to Ireland, they're not black pictures of in their churches. They haven't said that, though. There might be some hidden down in the bowels of the church, mind you. But you will not see their Father Christmas or their saints and that. They're of their own image, because it's natural. However, as I said to you, why are we building images of non-African people in Africa? It just shows you that their minds are not free. It makes perfect sense for us to create images. Somebody sent me a WhatsApp image yesterday And he got this guy dressed up like some sort of European Jesus in Kenya, and he's dancing on the street, and there's African people dancing with him. It's madness what's going on. We need to free our minds, and this is why I'm reading this book. We need to free our minds like yesterday. How can we? Don't you understand who this person is dancing? Can't we read the Bible? You realize that we read the Bible more than anybody else. Nobody reads the Bible and prays more than we do. But I said, images and ideas are used to manipulate the minds of people. And because we're given the images in books, statues, in Hollywood, we believe those images are true. When we read the book, even though it's a book that's been edited so many hundreds of thousands of times, even the book tells you who these people are or what the images should look like. But we ignore those because the images have manipulated us. I continue. The family reunions, which were initiated in such large numbers during the late 1970s, were an excellent and creative way to celebrate the black family's worth and survival expansion. The decoration of mantles on walls with black homes, with pictures of their children and their ancestors, through simple acts were profound efforts to carry on the celebration process as best we could in an environment that we had some control over. So we must have control of our homes, but why haven't we got control of our environments in Africa, for example? Why are we putting up these images of Because if you ask a child, go to an African child in Africa, go to an African child in Europe as well, and ask a black child, what colour is Jesus? What do you think the child's going to say? And when he says that he doesn't look like him, then who is that child in relation to that God if he doesn't look like the God? This is how inferiority is actually slipped into our minds, into our mindset. We teach our children from young to look at whiteness as divine. It's crazy. And when we go to the next chapter, we're going to cover this in the next chapter. But we need to understand these things. We can't think about, colourblind. We can't say anything because everybody sees colour. That is the beauty of the world, that everybody's got the different colours. Some people say, well, I'm colourblind. I don't see you as a colour. Why not? What's wrong with my colour? Should we all see everybody as their own colour? How can you colourblind if you can't see people? That means, are people see-through? Are they transparent? We must think about the world we live in and deal with the realities of the world we live in. We cannot be walking around in fantasies anymore. So we need to gain a broader control of the environment that we occupy so that we can expand those images of self-celebration. We should comfortably celebrate our own culture, schools or communities, the birthdays and histories of significant ancestors who have paid a great cost for our freedom. This celebration should and must go on independent of permission, be given by the outside political figures. Black History Month must be a start for the celebration of our being. It cannot be an exclusive celebration. It must continue from February the 1st to January the 31st the following year. I disagree with that. Our history, black or African to be more exact, should be 24/7, 365. We must celebrate ourselves every day of the week. We cannot rely on months given to us. It's ridiculous. We must celebrate it 24/7, 365. It cannot be an exclusive celebration. This must be a right that we guard and make apologies to no one for maintaining it. It is through celebration that we heal our damaged self-esteem. Yes, feeling good about oneself is a legitimate activity of cultures. In fact, any culture which does not make its adherents feel good about themselves is a failure as a culture. And that's another very good point. It is through self-celebration that we heal our damaged self-esteem. Yes, feeling good about oneself is a legitimate activity of cultures. In fact, any culture which does not make its adherents feel good about themselves is a failure as a culture. It is through the energy of self-worth that humans are motivated to improve and perpetuate themselves. The inspiration for the greatness of human accomplishment in architecture, science, poetry, art, industry, or any other human endeavor has has been fueled by the octane of self-worth and positive self-esteem. In the same vein, the low point of human degradation and even human self-destruction, both personally and collectively, is a constant consequence of the absence of self-esteem, which demoralizes the very human spirit. To free ourselves, we must comfortably celebrate ourselves. So let me repeat this bit again. In the same vein as the low point of human degradation and even human self-destruction, and think of some of our youths on the street, both personally and collectively, is a consequence of the absence of self-esteem. Hope you see where I'm coming from there. Which demoralizes the very human spirit. To free ourselves, we must comfortably celebrate ourselves. So this is Brother Jegna. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. We're going to take a short break. I'll be back on the other side. Please remember this show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. And you can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. So we're going to take a short break now, and we'll be right back on the other side.
His Majesty is coming now. His Majesty is coming now. Rejoice, rejoice. The wicked men them running now. The wicked men them running now. Rejoice, rejoice. Men make war and cause much pain. But now is no rejoice, rejoice. Men make war and cause much pain. But now is the time for Jah to win. Yeah, yeah. His Majesty is coming now. His Majesty is coming now. Rejoice, rejoice. Coming He's coming. You better rejoice. Coming well. Yeah, yeah. He's coming. You better rejoice. Yeah, 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 yeah. Rejoice. Coming well. Coming well. He's coming now. He's coming now. You better coming now. He's coming. You better
I, glory, hallelujah. Hallowed be thy name, O Most High God. Glory be to the Most High God. Hallowed be thy name, King of kings and Lord of lords, worthy to be praised. I ascribe to you dominion, power and grace. For all the years and years to come, you'll always be the same. It's me again, Jah, as I fall on my knees today. Help me, God, I pray. Don't wanna be carried away. It's me again, Jah, as I fall on my knees today. Help me, God, I pray. Preserve my soul today. I look around the world today, oh God, and you will see Pharisees and backbiters taking up in vanity. But I know you control my destiny. and from you all blessings flow. From yesterday, even today, and tomorrow, it's me again, Jah. As I fall on my knees today, help me, God, I pray. Don't wanna be carried away. It's me again, Jah. As I fall on my knees today, help me, God, I pray. Preserve my soul today. My heart is willing, my flesh is weak, but still, oh God, I seek to walk your way, your holy way. I pray my soul you keep. Though my enemies encamp at me, I know I will stand forevermore under your banner and for always in your hand. It's me again, Jah, as I fall on my knees today. Help me, God, I pray. Don't wanna be carried away. It's me again, Jah, as I fall on my knees today. Help me, God, I pray. Preserve my soul today. Glory, hallelujah. Bless my soul, oh Jah. Oh, Most High God, say glory be to the Most High God, hallowed be thy name. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords, worthy to be praised. I'll ascribe to you dominion, power and grace, throughout the years and years to come, and for our race. It's me again, Jah. As I fall on my knees today, help me, God, I pray. Don't wanna be carried away. It's me again, Jah. As I fall on my knees today, help me, God, I pray. Preserve my soul today. It's me again, Jah. As I fall on my knees today, help me, God, I I'll be down by the river, waiting for the good Lord to pass my way. Oh yeah, I'll be down by the river, singing songs of joy on this lovely day. Oh yeah, three singing birds told me by sunrise he's always there in the morning, praying and blessing the day. I've heard about this little tale long time ago, but never had the faith to believe in my soul. Now Mother Nature sent to me three little birds, singing a song, convincing me it was so. Now I'm on my way. Anyone come to see me this day, tell them I'll be gone for the day. I'll be down by the river, waiting for the good Lord to pass my way. Oh yeah, I'll be down by the river, singing songs of joy on this lovely day. Oh yeah. Ooh. I'm a fool, but never have the faith nor believe in my soul. Yeah, yeah. Now Mother Nature sent to me three little birds, singing a song, saying it was so. Now I'm on my way. Anyone come to see me this day, tell them I'll be gone for the day.
I'll be down by the river, waiting for the good Lord to pass my way. Oh yeah, I'll be down by the river, singing songs of joy on this lovely day. On this lovely day, singing songs of joy. Oh, oh,
Yes, family, brother Jagler back here again. This is the Afrocentricity Book Show. Hope you enjoy those little musical interlude there. You can see we're a very spiritual people. Well, all those three tunes there are about the spirit of Jah, spirit of God, spirit of the Creator, which to African people is male and female, by the way, not just a male figure. We're connected to it, yeah? We are connected to it because we are one with it, yeah? God is not something really outside of us. God is also within us as well because we are created by the Creator, so He has to be within us as well. So we are reading Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman show every Sunday between 4 and 6 on Bless Radio. This show is sponsored by Glass Are Us. You can get Glass Are Us at 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 5NH. You can get Glass Are Us on 0208 800 6663. That's 0208 800 6663. So please go to Glass At Us for all your glazing needs, double glazing, glass repairs, shelvings, tabletops, splashbacks, mirrors, shower cubicles, balustrade, balcony glasses. If you mention the show, you get a 10% discount. 730 Seven Sisters Road, N15 0208 800 6663. That is Glass Are Us, the sponsors of the show. So we're going to continue now. Yeah, we're on page 39. Only the brave need apply. So let me say, this Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, this is only a very thin book, but the book is so powerful. You could get a book of like 1,000 pages, 500 pages, and the book ain't saying much. And such a thin book like Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery is a very thin book, but it's very powerful. It's full of so much powerful information that we need to understand and bring into our lives, to educate our children about it, okay? These are not things that we should turn our back on. Some people don't want to talk about our enslavement and colonization because it's embarrassing. And I can understand that. However, if we don't deal with it, we can't deal the problems that came out of it, which some of it we still carry around with us today. We need to face it so we can analyze it, know what the hell's going on, and then we can deal with it, yeah? We can shake off some of these shackles which we still carry in our minds. The subtitle is Only the Brave Need Apply. The process of mental liberation is not like many of the requirements of physical liberation. Freedom from captivity must be taken, not passively requested. It is never willingly given, since the captivity has been in some way beneficial to the captor. I repeat that, it is never willingly given, since the captivity has been in some way beneficial to the captor. So the captor gives up his captive only reluctantly. As our great ancestral saints, Harriet Tubman, peace be upon her, and I hope you know there's a new film coming out very shortly. I've seen the trailers for it, for Harriet Tubman. We really need to go and see this film, Harriet Tubman. I've seen a clip of it the other day. As our great ancestral saints, Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, Medgar Evers, and many, many others, many are nameless, All found out the decision to take one's freedom meets with resistance and even mortal danger. To the captor, take the captor's trophy could easily result in the death of the captive. The lonely and ill-equipped road to freedom is one that will be wrought with all kinds of dangers. Excuse me 1 minute. Excuse me, thank you. It is one thing to sing songs of freedom and to dream dreams of one day having it, but to take the responsibility to claim one's freedom is not for the faint of heart. The nature of the alien consciousness, which has already created an atmosphere which justifies your captivity both to yourselves and to your fellow captives. You are viewed with suspicion of your sanity, and even raise the issue of wanting to be anything other than a well-kept slave. Both your fellow captives and your master cannot possibly conceive why you are not content to partake in his benevolence on his plantation, when you have earned the status of privileged, in speech marks, slave, economically, educationally, or favor from association with the master. Then it becomes even more incredible that you should want any more from his life in this world. The first designation is that you are crazy to think of freeing your mind. You are encouraged to compare yourself with your captive ancestors who suffered such great distress, and so many of your fellow captives who continue to suffer great agony. And this should be sufficient evidence of your blessed status. The fact that you no longer have little chains on your body is more than sufficient evidence that things are changing, and you are only a greedy and impatient step short of heaven. Once you are designated as crazy, then your credibility is seriously compromised. No one wants to be respected as sane, would dare pay any attention to you. What's even worse is that crazy, in speech marks, people are not to be trusted to care for themselves, and they must be carefully watched for fear that they may bring danger to themselves or others. Since your insanity has been defined by someone with another consciousness, with another set of objectives, then what constitutes a danger fits into their frame of reference and not into the frame of your free consciousness. Very important there. Since your insanity has been defined by someone, so what it is, if you want to act, sometimes you say, well, we should fight for our rights, fight for our freedom. Society will like to term you as crazy. Why? Because they like things just as they are. The status quo is as they are. As you know, on 1st of August, coming up very soon, there is the reparations march from Brixton right down to number 10. And if you notice, the BBC, who we pay all our money to for our TV license, do not show the march. If black people are rioting and setting fire to places, it'll be on every single news channel. But the BBC and all of the news channels, all in union, do not show the march. And why is that? Why, when black people are marching for liberation, for freedom, it's not given any airtime on our TVs? Yeah, these are questions we need to ask and answer, yeah? Q&A, questions and actions. So when we ask a question, once we know what it is, we need to act on it, yeah? Don't just sit down and think about it. We need to act on what it should be reflected in our actions. So since your insanity has been defined by someone with another consciousness, with another set of objectives, then what constitutes a danger fits into their frame of reference and not into the frame of your free consciousness. Courage is needed to deal with the isolation and vulnerability which results from this designation of your captors, or by your captors. The fact that they control the consciousness of most of your fellow captives means that you have a very few allies who can offer support and even protection as you seek to free your mind. The process of beginning to think new thoughts in a new consciousness is a lonely process. It has been described as going into a desert by the newly liberated children of Israel of the Old Testament and the Quran. It is described as going into the wilderness as did Jesus Christ after he was baptized or liberated by John the Baptist. Each of these scriptural images speaks to the sense of isolation which comes from a newfound freedom. So I am a great believer, I'm interjecting here, I'm a great believer that these holy books are written mainly to control the minds of his people. So you are indoctrinated, i.e. their doctrine is put into your minds, and you must follow what the book says. So I'm not like, because I'm free to think as I need to. However, there's a lot of wisdom in those books, and you can learn from it. So he remarks it that when people are liberated, could be baptized, you see the world differently. Shackles are moved from your mind, and then you don't need to do what you need to do. So each of these scriptural images speaks to the sense of isolation which comes from a newfound freedom. So when you find freedom, you may be isolated, because some people say, look at him, oh, don't follow that guy, he's a bit crazy, he's a bit mad. He keeps talking about Africa. He keeps talking about freedom, you know. We just want to go down to watch TV and go to the cinema, and he's talking about stuff, oh, he's going to create problems. We need to understand, yeah, how for somebody said, it's better to be free than enslaved, poor and free than enslaved and rich, because we're not supposed to be slaves, we're humans, the first humans in fact. So it's a natural state for us to be imprisoned, shackled. The loneliness and vulnerability which comes from the removal of your chains and trying out your new legs is considerable, as was the wilderness experience for both the Hebrew children and the Christ. There are strong temptations to relapse, constantly confronting the newly freed mind in the desert. The reminder of the security and companionship that you knew as a captive is constantly thrown out in front of you. The possibilities for fame and fortune, if you will abort your new consciousness and come back into your captive's mindset, is almost a daily consideration. So what is, okay, there's a book called The First Rasta, and his name was Leonard Howell. This is in Jamaica. And he started to speak across Jamaica, walk up and down the island to great crowds, saying that we should stop following the Queen of England. We should start to worship Selassie. He's an African king. Look to the east, Marcus Garvey said. So he looked to the east and saw him, yeah? The status quo, the government of Jamaica, which is obviously run by the former slave masters, or the same people with slave master mentality, treated him and locked him in prison, locked him up as a mad person. Why? Because he was talking stuff that they didn't want to hear. And they said he must be mad. And they will shake the minds of people so he looks mad. They always do that, characteristic. But if you sort of said, yes, we must worship this, and we must worship that, and we must love the Queen of England, they treat you as, oh, this person is a very sane person, a very great person. Just listen to what he says, yeah? So they always do this. Any person who they attack, for the most part, you know they're going to be for you. Dr. Malefi Asante, when he created the concept of Afrocentricity, all he was saying was, black people, African people just need to see the world through their own eyes, and he was attacked by anybody. But is it only Chinese allowed to see the world through their eyes, and Europeans allowed to see the world through their eyes? But when black people say we need to see the world through their eyes, we're attacked for it. Does that make sense? So anybody who attacks you for looking through the world through eyes wants you to see the world through their own eyes, how they see you. And if people hate you, and you see the world through their eyes, you're going to help hate yourself. That's why self-hatred comes from, because they've degraded the image of the black person already, black mother, black father, black children already. If you see the world from there, your self-concept is nil. So we need to understand, these are the things we need to understand, okay? So they see themselves as less competent and infinitely less accomplished fellow captives rewarded extravagantly with fame. So they see their less competent and infinitely less accomplished fellow captives rewarded extravagantly with fame, fortune, and celebrity status simply because they're confirmation of their master's consciousness and his reality to the correct way to think. One can receive grants, tenures, promotions, movie roles, television shows, book contracts, or just the fame of being a prominent display on the master's centerpiece, simply by disavowing the consciousness of freedom and comfortably staying in the confines of the mental plantation. So I hope you understood what I'm saying there, yeah? When you follow what the road the master set out for you, you're given awards and money and TV shows and movie roles and stuff like that. But if you want to be a rebel, say, no, we need to go our own way. We are African people, we are black people, we got our own culture, we got our own values. We need to work our own way. That person be attacked because they don't want you to empower yourself. This is why those who would choose to break the chains of mental slavery must be courageous. Only the very brave can resist the temptations or endure the isolation. Since the new consciousness can take a lifetime to begin, to show tangible results, it takes a great deal of courage to persist in breaking the chains of the old consciousness and developing a new consciousness. This is another area where the new information and the self-celebration becomes important. You cannot rely upon the encouragement of the multitudes running your support and defense. The very nature of the slave's mentality ensures that a majority of slaves will be primarily committed to their master and his consciousness. Though your very life is committed to freeing the minds of the captives, you will be perceived by them as an enemy, and they will gladly surrender you to crucifixion, for the nature of the enslaved mind demands it. This requires you be patient and comfortable with what you know is correct, even though with so much consensus that you are wrong. You must be able to hold on to your right of freedom, and this takes great courage. So it's very, very interesting there. He's saying that if you're going to march on a liberation road, if you want to get liberation's train, you're going to be attacked for it. The majority of people whose minds and consciousness still belongs to their dominator, shall we say, enslaver, will be against you. They'll attack you. What's he doing that for? What's wrong with him? What's he talking about the African stuff for? Do you think Chinese say, oh, why are you being Chinese? Or Indians say, oh, you're being too Indian? No, because they know their culture. They love their culture. But we've been told to hate our very existence, our culture, our values, everything. So we are normally attacked. Harriet Tubman, there's a very famous quote by Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman said, I freed 1,000 slaves. Or, I freed many slaves. And she said, I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. So this is a lady who freed herself, and she went back for her family, and she made many trips, risking her own life, to free more and more of the enslaved people. And she said she freed hundreds of slaves, but she could have freed 1,000 more, only if they knew they were slaves. So it's a very profound saying there. She's telling us that some of us don't even understand we're enslaved. And these are people who had chains. Saw chains around them, didn't know that. So because the chains have been removed now, even today we've got people who don't understand that we are not free until we've got self-determination. So it takes courage to walk on this road. It takes courage. But if you're on this road, you stay on this road. Don't let nobody deflect you. It's a hard road. Some old people, you won't get no credit from them. In fact, your own people will attack you. But you need to stay on this road. If you want your children and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren to be free. Rebellious slaves have always been dealt with in a very brutal fashion. In the days of physical plantation, they were beaten, mutilated, or killed. In later times, the same torture was the fate of those who threatened the status assigned to the former slaves. Even today, the possibility of imprisonment, police brutality, mysterious deaths from questionable causes is still the fate of those who challenge the master's consciousness. I mean, Steve Biko taken into custody, killed, because he said that Africans need to be Africans. We've got our own culture, we've got our own history. We need to look back to our ancestors and walk in the feet of our ancestors. They took him away and killed him. If he used to tell everybody to worship a white Jesus, they wouldn't have touched him. But because he said we're African people, we need to go back to who we are. We need to go back to our own culture. He was killed by the police. Of course, there are always the social murders of being unable to make a living, being publicly humiliated and accused of all kinds of horrendous crimes of reverse racism, anti-Semitism, un-American or anti-European, no doubt, activity, etc., etc. The bottom line is that those who seek to get free are still dealt with severely. And one should not take the decision to break the chains from your mind as a minor consideration. It will take courage. How do we gain such courage? The more we know, the braver we become. The stronger our pride and self-love, the greater our courage. We must maintain associations with newly escaped slaves who know the price and the feeling of true mental liberation. There is strength in association. So what he's saying is you must go to people who think like you. If anybody's around you or not thinking of what you need to do and you know what you need to do, I think we all know what we need to do. You don't want to be around those people, yeah? You need to associate with people who think like you. That will give you strength and support. We must seek out colonies of maroons or runaways, the great solace from our association with like-minded souls. We must commune with the spirits of the ancestors who knew and took freedom before us and anticipated and in anticipation of us. My apologies. We must stand with Paul Robeson, Marcus Garvey, Sojourner Truth, Fannie Lou Hamer, Elijah Muhammad, Harriet Tubman, W.E. Du Bois, Malcolm X. We must stand with these people. These are our great ancestors who left us great examples of how we should carry ourselves. These people were fearless, and many of them put their lives on the line for us. We should not forget them. Excuse me. They refused to settle for captivity in any form, and whose entire lives were examples of the commitment to breaking the mental chains and going into the desert until they were free. The ultimate weapon against fear is faith, which we should discuss below. So this is Brother Jegna. This is the Afrocentricity Bookman Show. We are reading Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. This is Bless Radio. So this book is by Naim Akbar. It's a very powerful book. And I'm going to continue. So the next subheading is Umoja, or unity. So Umoja comes from the key Swahili language. It is the lingua franca of East Africa. So people, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, around the area all speak Swahili, yeah? And in Swahili tongue, Umoja means unity, coming together. If you know, for those who go to Kwanzaa, you know that the first day is a 7-day celebration, and every day we celebrate a value. And the first day of Kwanzaa is unity. First day of Kwanzaa is Umoja. But remember, these values are not just for the 7 days. Again, 365, 24/7. We must have these values. Why? Because they are our values. They are our culture. There is strength in solidarity with others who are seeking to break the chains. As we have discussed in earlier sections of this book, community division, i.e. separation, divide and conquer, was one of the major weapons used against the enslaved. The fact that so much effort has gone into making sure that slaves do not form a common identity is indicative of the value of such a common identity. As demonstrated during the civil rights struggles in the 1960s in the USA, as well as a successful Million Man March in 1995, the most potent weapon that we have developed, and we have in developing any kind of independent freedom, is through unity. Because you see how society sticks together. Remember, the Million Man March was really the brainchild of Elijah Muhammad, my apologies, Minister Farrakhan, and the UN and the Nation of Islam. And you know how the press attacked him for that? BT, when they did the last march, last get together, BT, so-called Black Entertainment Network, wouldn't even show him. But if you notice very recently, Farrakhan, his Twitter account's been stopped, his Facebook account's been stopped, everything's been stopped, yeah? They just want to shut him down. Why do they want to shut him down? Remember, he organised a 1 million man march. So again, division. And also, when somebody stands up to say he's right, they'll attack, oh, Farrakhan is crazy. What did he say? Oh, he calls white man the nigger, he calls a white man the devil. We can't stand for that. This man must be crazy to say that. I move on. Breaking the mental chains of the slave requires us to stand together, despite the definitions of division that we have been given under the slave consciousness. We have discussed in the previous chapter the impact of the Willie Lynch kit for the control of the slaves. As we might gain greater knowledge and information, many of those divisions will disappear because they cannot stand under the light of truth and correct information. We must see our membership in religious groups, political groups, professions, academic groups, even in gender and class groups, as being devices which can be and continue to be used to keep us divided and at war with each other. And although there are certainly issues on which we differ based upon the experiences of these various groups and categories, we must realize all those differences are secondary. And when it comes to the reality of breaking the chains, so I hope you understood that, yeah? Because sometimes we'll say the Muslims want to fight the Christians, and the Christians, in Africa, some Christians, they've gone and the old shrines, for example, Yoruba people, and they've got their shrines to Olodumare and Oduduwa. Christians gone there and smashed up their shrines. So imagine the Africans have smashed up African shrines for Christianity. Division. Because the idea is that, well, you worship some African god, you're not one of us. And that helps to divide us. We all got the same pressure. We could be a Muslim, we could be a Christian, we could be like a traditional African spiritual reality, spiritual systems. But we all got the same oppressor. So we need to understand these things. The divisions are not real. We are one family. We are all one family. This is what we need to keep in mind. That's the Pan-African view of the world. We are the same people. We have got the same past. We've got the same present. And we've got the same future. And we've got the same oppressor as well. If you look in the mirror and you don't see a friend there, you've got no friends. We have no friends except ourselves. We can do this more effectively if we begin by allying ourselves with other blacks in various groups where we find ourselves in. When we stand together with other blacks in our religious or political groups, professions or even gender groups, we find that we have much more in common as black members of those groups than we do with our non-black colleagues. And this is not to say that you can have a friend who's non-African, You could have a friend who's non-African, I should say, who helped you out when you really need it, nobody else helped you out, who gave you a job, whatever it could be, they really helped you out. And that's what we're saying. We're talking about as a people, there are systems in place. Nations hate Africans, Europeans, Asians. Just see the behavior we have. Just read. Look at newspapers, groups. What's happening in Libya? They're enslaving black African people there. They're being murdered there, and they're harvesting their organs to sell their organs. So we need to understand this. We've got no friends but ourselves. We can become friends with others, but only when we're in a position of power. When you're in a position of weakness, people will only use you and abuse you and manipulate you. We need to come together so we're in a position of power. And then we can maybe make these ties with other people. This realization brings the point home very clearly that we must stand together on the basis of our racial realities. Once we are able to see the commonality of our issues in the groups where we have strong identities, then we'll be able to form coalitions with black people who are part of groups that we may know nothing about or feel hostile towards. So different fraternity men stood together as black men at the Million Man March. Black Republicans, Democrats, Socialists stood together. Black graduates from the Naval Academy and West Point stood together when they realized that the unified reality of being black men brought them together. In a similar vein, Maya Angelou, Rosa Parks, Betty Shabazz all stood together in solidarity with Ben Chavis, Jesse Jackson, and Louis Farrakhan in the recognition that even being called a man march requires them to be united regardless of gender. This is the kind of unity which is critical to obtaining mental liberation. As we have noted above in our discussions of the courage, it is not possible to get free alone. Yeah, we need each other. The chains are very heavy and are interconnected, which requires us to free each other as we free ourselves. The frightening thing about unity for many of the slaves is the fact that we may lose special privileges they may have been able to acquire by the uniqueness that they can sing or play for sports, speak the language well, yeah, maybe some sort of politician, or they are one of those only blacks of some kind of organization. We know that many of these kinds of concerns vanish once we make the commitment to break the chains in our minds. With that commitment, we are no longer interested in holding on to our minor slave privileges. On the other hand, however, there are unique talents and qualities which we all have. In the process of liberation, it is important to recognize that unity does not require uniformity. We can stand together and preserve our separate qualities, which serve to enhance further the objectives of freeing ourselves and all of our people. We cannot break the chains unless we appreciate our unique form of enslavement, while not permitting that uniqueness to impede our unity with others who are trying to get free. At the same time, as we free ourselves, we must adapt our special gifts and enhance the liberation process. So, our differences are minuscule to what we need to do. We need to come together on what we have in common, yeah? In the process of uniting, we bring our special gifts to the total process of breaking the chains. If you sing, then sing freedom songs. If you play ball, then play freedom ball. If you tell jokes, laugh while breaking the chains, as Dick Gregory and Bill Cosby have done. Never let your unique gift be used to keep yourself and the remainder of our people in slavery. In fact, this is one of the most popular strategies. There are so many musicians, comedians, and scholars who are rewarded for bringing messages which continue to tighten the mental chains. The same special use that our captors make of our gifts, we can use to further our mental liberation. The key to the power of unity in this liberation process is that we must avoid the danger of letting ourselves be used to impede the freedom process. In these latter days of the 20th century, this is the major strategy of battle against our liberation. In a similar vein, we must appreciate the power of unity as the major instrument of breaking the chains which continue to inhibit our minds. So this is Brother Jegna. We've got about 15 minutes to go. So this is the Afrocentricity Book Show. Every Sunday, 4 till 6, we are reading Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Naim Akbar. Evidence of things unseen. Probably the most important quality used in the act of achieving physical liberation from slavery was the inner power to believe that freedom was possible. It took a strong, compelling belief that even though you could not see freedom and how to reach it, you knew that it was possible, and you were willing to confront all the odds to obtain it. This is the power of faith. And it was the power of faith that took Harriet Tubman back and forth on her many trips on the Underground Railroad. It was faith that permitted the thousands who ran away and took their freedom and endured the dangers and obstacles to reach their goal. It was faith that sustained those who did not run away to keep their spirit and dignity intact until physical freedom was achieved. It was faith that kept the brutalized slaves from not giving up. In much the same way, faith is necessary to achieve mental freedom as well. The faith that we are describing does not apply to any particular religious expression. Even though all religions are based on faith and are intended to cultivate faith, the faith must be a basic sense that everything will be all right, no matter how things may appear. Whether this certainty comes from belief in a supreme being or in a process like karma. The person looking to obtain mental freedom must find something to give them a sense of faith that everything will be all right. This sense may come directly from a belief in a new consciousness and the freedom that it will bring, and a conviction that no matter how hard the battle, my apologies, lost my page there. Good. I am certain that in the physical slaves made to fight to freedom just on the basis of faith that anything will be better than captivity. And this faith was strong enough to sustain them in their struggle for liberation. Without a strong faith in something bigger than your master and yourself, there is no way to engage in the struggle that is necessary to achieve freedom. As we have stated above, it is faith that provides a shield from our fears. It is the belief that everything will be all right that feeds the courage we described as being so necessary in obtaining this mental freedom. It is through the power of faith that the mentally enslaved person can, in the image of Samson, break the chains which confine us. This is another of those instances where qualities we already have can be transformed to serve the purpose of our freedom. Our faith is already in a concept of God, who has dominion over all things. Then, like Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, and many others, we can use the faith we already have to sustain us in our efforts to get free. Now, if that faith is in the God of the chains, or in the God of the person who put us in the chains, then of course, that faith will do you no good in getting free. Let me repeat that. Now, if that faith is in the God of the chains or in the God of the person who put you in the chains, then of course that faith will do you no good in getting free. So that's very important there, because I spoke about Nigeria, and I know it's all over. There's the images of these non-African looking gods. They're saying these gods are of the people who enslaved us. Worshipping that God is not going to free you. How can you worship the God of your oppressor? If your oppressor is praying to a God and you're praying to the God, who's that God going to listen to? The oppressor, whose God it is, or the oppressed, whose God it isn't? You just think it's your God, but you was given to it. Because if you think of these people who adopt many of these religions, when do you get this religion? Did you just decide one day to be a religion? Or were your ancestors brutalized and murdered to become a part of these religions? I think these are the questions we need to ask ourselves. And this will shape our actions afterwards, once we get an answer. In fact, it was that kind of faith that made many slaves fear to take their freedom, or even to believe that freedom was in a violation of God. Such can also be the cause of seeking mental freedom. Of course, it is particularly difficult when the slave believes his chains are decreed by God, and God then has become the chains. I'm repeating this. Of course, it is particularly difficult when the slave believes that his chains are decreed by God, and God then has become the chains. In the next chapter, we will discuss the impact of religious images on our psychology. We will further analyze the potential dilemma created by faith in alien images. Faith must be acquired from within. Shall I repeat that? Faith must be required from within. This is very much an individual task, which must be accomplished by drawing upon the example and the inspiration of those who have faith. We can be taught about faith by those who know faith, but each of us must explore our inner self to discover the power of faith. We must be willing to search for the belief in a power higher than circumstances, and to locate this evidence of things unseen. One of the great discoveries which comes from gaining information about who we are as African people is the overwhelming and convincing evidence that faith has been the sustaining force which has brought us to where we are. Where other people may point to material or intellectual resources, our power has always been, in our spiritual resources. And it is this realization that helps us to discover the power of faith and our potential for faith, even if we have not yet discovered it. The task of breaking the chains of mental slavery requires a great deal of faith. Faith gives us the patience to stick to the job of looking for our own reality. It gives us determination to overcome the hold of the chains of the plantation mind, which tends to increase their grip as we seek to free ourselves. Since the situation of slavery created such a void of information from the African reality and so effectively erased African consciousness, then it requires a great deal of faith to pursue the restoration of its awareness. As we mentioned above, the ever-present opposition, which says to the fleeing mental slave that there is no reality other than the European consciousness, requires a faith to keep on seeking and building. Certainly it is faith that sustains us in the fear and loneliness of this lifelong search to help restore who we are. Let's get to work, is the heading. Each of us has to make the commitment to engage in the personal and collective job of freeing ourselves from mental slavery. The strategies we have outlined above, which will assist in us changing our consciousness, is a continuous process. We must work to re-educate ourselves and our young people by seeking and studying new information about ourselves. We must find every opportunity to celebrate ourselves, and we must challenge the fear that causes us to hesitate in taking the chains out of our minds. We must work together, and we must have faith in our struggle that will be successful, regardless of the opposition. The first step is acknowledgement of our slave mentality and the fact that we remain limited in our effectiveness because of the slavery experience. There are many Africans who will be unable to do this because the very nature of the mental slavery creates an illusion that we are free. Hopefully, this publication and many of the experiences that inevitably we will have will help us reach this realization. We trust in the natural love that human beings have for freedom that will motivate us to break the chains once we realize they exist. As we have discussed above, we will immediately understand that we cannot be freed as individuals, but must work to free all of the mental captives. As we become aware of our captured mental state, and this is the last paragraph here, then we will have to commit ourselves to join the mental liberation process for all black people. The accomplishment of this task will become increasingly easy as we gain more and more people committed to this mental liberation struggle. So that's the end of that chapter, and the next chapter is a very powerful one. The next chapter is called Racial Religious Imagery and Psychological Confusion. So we will start that next week. We're coming to the end of the show now. I hope this has really helped you guys, yeah? Breaking the chains of psychological slavery is something we need to understand. We've got so many different issues that we have to confront and deal with. So it's very important that we do this, yeah, as soon as possible. We all have to join Liberation Road. It's no good of an individual to be free or wealthy or rich, yeah? It's very important that we are free as a people. It's the only way this is going to work. If one of us wakes up, you have to wake up somebody else. Each one teach one is the key to this, yeah? I cannot be free myself. I can still see my brother enslaved, my sister enslaved. We need to wake up all our people to understand where we are and who we are. Our recent history. Remember, slavery is only a little minuscule part of our history. It's minuscule. However, it's important because it explains our present condition. Remember, we're the oldest people on the planet. 70,000 years, there was only us, because we hadn't left the African continent here. We are maybe, as a people, 200, as humans, 200,000 years old. Enslavement, 400 years, 500 years. And it's ongoing, unfortunately. Some of it's still ongoing, even though the chains are not there, except they are in places like Libya, Saudi Arabia. However, we need to understand what is happening around us. If we don't understand, we cannot tackle it. Afrocentrist International will be putting on events, and I'm going to promote you, because we're going to put up, we said we have to educate stuff, so we're thinking about putting talking groups, book clubs together. So we need to do all these things. So keep an eye out. We will be organising these things. We're going to need to promote you, get the community coming there, so we will develop book clubs, yeah? And so we can have a topic, we can meet somewhere, we can discuss a book and have great discussions about the book. So it's very important we do this. We're going to put on some classes on history and culture as well. So we need to understand exactly who we are, where we are, and what we need to be doing. So I hope you enjoy the show. Hope you enjoy the show, and we'll be continuing next week. We'll continue breaking the chains of psychological slavery, and next week will be another week. So have a great week, people. I will see you next week. Yeah, stay strong, stay with your family. Each one teach one. Yeah, one love.
The sun shining. The angels are dancing in heaven. You hear me?
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Better days are coming by and by. We can make it if we try. Come on. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up.
Father God, in your name I pray. Help the people find their way. Look around and then I see a little old man and a homeless lady. They don't have no food to eat. Father, give them a warm place to sleep. Come on, wake up the people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up, wake up, people, wake up now. Storms will come and storms will go. The earth may quake and still the souls of the ones we love. And some will die,
Some shall
but
die.
they're in heaven, so dry your eyes.
Dry your eyes.
Celebrate life,
Don't you cry.
jump for joy,
Jump for joy.
like a baby with a toy.
Little baby.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up now.
Wake up. Wake up.
Wake up, people, wake up.
Dry your eyes.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Don't you cry.
Wake up the people, wake up. Wake up. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up. Wake up now. Wake up the people, Lord, wake up.
Wake up.
Wake up the people, Lord, wake up now.
Wake up.